Hi, my name is Mark at M2M Technology, and today's video is going to be all about how to pay your suppliers. As you've possibly noticed, I have my assistant here, so let's get started. Nearly got it out the garden. There are several different ways of paying your suppliers, but we're going to start, settle down, but we're going to start with the simplest. That is to say, well, imagine that you've already paid your supplier and you just want to tell Sage about it. To do that, go into your purchase ledger, go to Enter Transactions, and then record a payment. Once you've recorded it, you can allocate that to the invoice. Happy days. But much more common is to use the Sage 200 period end routine to actually pay multiple suppliers all at once using the suggested payments routine. That's mostly what we're going to be covering today. Dodge is just reminding me that it is possible to produce checks out of Sage 200, but that's a little bit old school, and I'm going to assume that if you're doing that, you've been doing it long enough to know how to do it. Of course, if you've got any questions, comment below and I'll do my best to help, but today we're mostly going to be focusing on the e-banking principles. Now, the key to these more complicated options are your payment groups. Each one of your suppliers is a member of a payment group, and it's useful to know which one. You can look in a supplier's record to find out, or you can add the payment group information onto the suppliers list and see it directly on the front screen. The payment group is what determines how you pay this supplier, for example, using e-banking or check, and also how the supplier gets their remittance, whether it's something that you're going to be printing and posting, or whether you're going to be emailing it automatically out of the program. So, payment groups determine how our suppliers get paid and also how the remittance is produced. And you can see which payment group your supplier is in the supplier record and on the supplier list view by adding a couple of columns. Once you know which payment groups your suppliers are in, you can go to the Purchase Ledger, Utilities, Ledger Setup, Ledger Settings, and if you go to the Payment Groups tab, it will tell you what the payment groups mean. You can have a maximum of 10 and they can all be configured differently, or you can use just one payment group for all. But once you know whether your suppliers are paid by e-banking or by check, and how the remittance is going to be produced, you can move on. It's worth noting that these aren't things you should have to change often, if at all, and we're just talking about the background to how this whole thing works. Now, of course, if you're going to pay your suppliers electronically using e-banking, it's important to have their bank account details on file. And in order to make everyone's life more secure, in a recent Sage 200 update, this information has been hidden behind an extra wall of permissions. You may not have noticed, but if you go into your supplier record, can you see the banking tab? The banking tab? The banking tab? Can you see the banking tab? If you don't have access to this, contact your Sage administrator, ask them to give you that permission. It might be useful if you let them know that it's in the Purchase Ledger Advanced area of the settings. Shall we see if we can get it out the garden? Oh! This information shouldn't need changing very often, but if you do need to check or change it, it's important to have access to this part of the program. And finally, you will of course need to have the e-banking modules installed and enabled. Click on the link above or below or wherever to get a guide on how to do that. It should only take a couple of moments. Anyway, hopefully we're now all set up and ready to pay. We've got a good idea of how to progress, so let's get to it. Now, there is no hard and fast way of... There is no hard and fast rule for doing this, except don't do it when there's a tractor going past. Seriously. There is no hard and fast rule of what you should and shouldn't do, but certainly many things are common, and that's what I'm going to cover today. So, how to do your payment run. Step 1. Ensure that any payments you've already made to your suppliers have been allocated, and the same with any, as Dodger says, and do credit notes as well. Step 2. Run the suggested payments routine. This process will automatically look at all the invoices that you've got on your system, see which ones are due for payment, and suggest that you pay them. you'll likely get a message that a suggested payment file already exists, and asking if you want to overwrite it. Now, as long as you're sure that you're the only person trying to pay suppliers at the moment, click yes, it's fine. But if you think anybody else might be trying to do the same job, stop, check, find out. Now, once this suggested payments routine is complete, it's going to ask if you want to see the report. Choose yes. This report is then going to give you a list of all the invoices that it thinks are due for payment and suggest that you pay them. Step 3. Review this list to see if you agree and make a note of any differences that you have. If you're unhappy with any of the payments that the program is suggesting, you can remove those payments via the Amend Suggested Payments field, which is, coincidentally, Step 4. In the Amend Suggested Payments screen, you can go through your suppliers, account by account, and amend any of the payments that the program has suggested. You can remove the payment altogether, you can make a part payment, do whatever you like. The suggested payments routine will generate suggestions for paying all of your suppliers. But again, because all of your suppliers might be in different payment groups, the actual payment process is done group by group. Once you've made any amendments to the payments that it's suggesting for suppliers in a given payment group, I would then recommend that you generate the suggested payments report again for that payment group. This will confirm any changes that you've made and give you confirmation of what you're about to pay these suppliers. Once you're happy with the figures that the program is suggesting, the next step, Step 6, is to click Generate Payments. When you do this, pick the payment group that you wish to generate the payments for, pick the bank account that you wish to make the payments from, enter the date that you're going to make the payments and also any transaction references as you need to. Now, assuming you are paying by e-banking, that will launch the e-banking wizard and it will confirm how many payments you're making and to what value. Obviously, check that you agree with that and then click OK.
What?
Now, depending on which e-banking plugin you use and which bank software you're using, you might get different options at this point for bulk payments or ad hoc payments or faster payments. The choice of that is up to you and your bank. I'm afraid I can't tell you which routine you need to be following, but your bank should have given you that information, so please do check with them if you're at all unsure.
There you put it, you crazy dog.
Next, the system will ask you where you want to save that banking file. Obviously, choose somewhere where you're going to be able to find it, but other than that, it doesn't really matter.
No.
And likewise, it doesn't really matter what you call the file. It will be a plain text file, but you can give it whatever name you want. You can call it George, or you can use the default name that the program gives it, which is likely, basically, today's date, whatever that is. Having created that payment file, the system is going to create a whole bunch of payment transactions in the program and allocate those to the invoices according to the information in your suggested payments file. And then finally, it's going to produce some remittances. Again, depending on your settings, it's going to produce some emails and send them out to your suppliers, or produce a report listing all the remittances that you can then print out and post to your suppliers. But the upshot is that now Sage has helped you pay a whole bunch of suppliers a whole load of money and produce remittances so that they know what's been paid and why. It's also produced a small electronic file that you can upload to your bank's website, software, app, whatever, that will allow you to confirm and authorise that payment to be made to the suppliers. The length of time the whole process takes should really depend on how many changes you want to make to that suggested payments file and whether you've done it before. Once you're familiar with the routine, the whole process should really take minutes rather than hours. Now, if you did have any problems producing the remittances, maybe your printer ran out of ink or whatever, you do have a window during which you can reprint those remittances. Again, I'm not going to cover it here, but get in touch straight away if that is the case. If you're emailing the remittances, you should always have access to those in your sent items. But if you're not, if you're printing hard copies, I would also recommend that you spool the remittance reports, because otherwise you won't be able to refer to them later on. As I mentioned, there is a small window where you can reprint them from within the software. Good catch. But if you miss that window, you simply can't reprint a remittance, at least not very easily. Much easier to spool the report and keep it on file should you ever need it. Now, obviously the paying of suppliers is a very stressful process, and you definitely don't want to get it wrong and pay too much. But past that, there's a lot of different fiddly options that you and your company might use that are really too complicated to go in here and would give us all a bit of a headache. So, hopefully that's been useful. If you do have any questions or problems, by all means get in touch. And if there's anything else we can do to help, again, please let us know. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe, or please comment down below in the doobly-doo if you'd like me to cover anything else in particular detail. Other than that, my name's Mark. That was clever. My name's Mark, his name's Dodger, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.